when I think of the way they rewarded hostage-taking by the regime by paying them ransom money, when we know that the called for oil sanctions actually are not being implemented, which means more cash at the regime's hand, which of course is not going to be spent on suffering people in Iran, but on reinforcing their troops and their proxies. What do you expect as a result? What do you expect? The best line that they could come up with was, don't. Are you kidding me? Did you hear Churchill say don't? Did you hear Ronald Reagan say don't? No, he said tear down that wall. Without strong leadership, particularly in the Western world, we will have a tough challenge. Let us remind ourselves that what put an end in the Second World War was the strong leadership of Roosevelt in Washington and Churchill in London. What put an end ultimately to the Soviet Empire and forced Gorbachev to in fact go towards perestroika and glasnost was the strong leadership of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. I ask you, vis-a-vis Putin and Xi today, what do we have? Just a question. But all I'm suggesting is that if there's any dependence by decision makers, they have to understand that the world is not going to be silent on that. This is people's power. We have to force the agenda. You have to force the agenda. Don't leave it up to them to decide. They've already proven that they're not making the right decisions. So we have to make the difference. I remember a phrase by President de Gaulle who once said, les circonstances ne sont pas favorables, il faudra donc changer les circonstances. Which means the circumstances are not favorable, we shall therefore have to change the circumstances. That's the game changer. We need to change the circumstances. So I would say exactly this, whether it's Joe Biden or Donald Trump or whoever might end up, that this ought to be the new look. As I said, trying to appease Goliath is no longer tenable. Give David a chance. David are the people of Iran. The people of Iran who have been the most natural army on the ground. Had it not been for some bad implementation, regime change got a bad name for a while. To be the truth, it was like taboo wording. You couldn't mention the word regime change in Washington for the last 2 decades. But now they have to rethink whether or not, in fact, that's not the ultimate solution. And we're not asking for America to send troops or invade Iran or do any of these kind of things. No, just support the Iranian people. Stop giving money to the regime, help the Iranian people. What they're asking for. Make sure that they are not disconnected from the world. Make sure they have access to the internet. Make sure that they can get the Starlinks and others helping out there, and so on. Why don't we ask legislators, as long as the law allows it, to use the frozen assets of the regime that in fact is the Iranian people money to in fact fund strike funds so we can help our workers go on strike. We're not asking for American taxpayer or French taxpayers or German taxpayer before our own money could be spent, but that's a matter of changing policy. Why not changing the policy that right now prohibits any means of transferring money back home to help a family? Every one of you could sponsor one family in Iran for small amount of money, but give them a chance to in fact be able to stand on their feet and take the risk of going on strike. That's the quickest way to paralyze the regime. We don't need to go on the streets and get shot at all the time. We can stay home and refuse to go to work. In 3 months, the regime will collapse, if not sooner, if that was able to be done. But instead, It is convenient to brush it around under the rug and kick the can down the road and say, you know what, this is a fait accompli, we have to learn to live with these guys. That's not true. That's not at all true. Because which part of the regime in Iran represents the Iranian people? None. What legitimacy do they have to sit at the negotiation table? Whether it's JCPOA or any other negotiation, they don't speak for us. They don't represent us. So that's adding insult to injury, because you're turning your back on a nation that shared, by the way, the same values that you do about human rights, about freedom, about liberty. But you still choose to deal with the status quo and help them. We have to make this equation change. And again, I go back to my previous answer. This is where we can make the difference. We can speak up, we can take action, but in unison. I know there will be time for disagreement. That's normal. No, we cannot all think the same thing. But let's do it methodically. Let's do it in an arena where there's truly freedom of expression, where we can have open debates, when we can have free media, when we no longer have political prisoners, when we can have political parties that participate in the political process. Then we can have all the debates. But to get there, and in absence of any of this, there's only one solution. We have to do as the Iranians what we need to do, but we need to talk to leaders in the foreign countries that at least claim to be valuing the same values, that rather than negotiating with your sworn enemies, why don't you start helping your true friends? That's how the difference will happen. And that's what we need right now. This is the time. We have to take advantage of this moment, because I don't know how long this window will remain open before yet another generation of Iranians are sacrificed for nothing. We saw the reactions of Iranians days after the unfortunate attack, as the regime was trying to orchestrate a pro-Hamas or pro-Palestinian action, and in a couple of soccer matches in Iran, and I don't think I can repeat these words because
I'll cover my ears.
You're going to hear a lot of bleeping on whatever the media will broadcast, but it was a clear answer of people. I'm not talking about people outside of Iran, mind you. It's much easier to do this in Berlin or London or here in Los Angeles. In Iran proper, under the watchful eyes of the regime, openly say, you know where you can take that flag. And at the same time, so many images of Iranians and Jews and Israelis solidarity with our flag's reason, as I said in my speech, in many places. That doesn't happen by coincidence. This is not an orchestrated campaign. This is a genuine sentiment, a pent-up sentiment of a nation that has been so humiliated that when they once were traveling the world, most of the time without a visa, when an Iranian passport was respected, and now how we are perceived, imagine that sentiment. And thank God for the parents who remind their children of what Iran used to be like and what it has become. It did not remain like that. We will make it again a great nation. Stronger and better than it ever was. Imagine an Iran 2.0 with everything that we will rectify, because it was not mistake-free, let's be honest. But where we were going, Iran should have been today's Japan of the Middle East. Instead, we have become the North Korea of the Middle East. Do we lack resources? No. Do we lack ingenuity and know-how? Aren't there so many Iranians who actually run companies and corporations and hospitals and universities and many parts of the world that could be in Iran instead but couldn't be there right now? Because many of them were forced to flee simply because they were Jewish or Baha'i or politically different-minded than this regime. We can make it happen again. I ask you once again, don't tell me anymore, we hope. Start telling me, we believe. We believe. We win. Thank you, Rafa.